Good morning, dear friends. Wasn't that beautiful? Welcome to Unitarian Universalist Church West. Welcome to this caring, justice-loving congregation of adults, teens, and children diverse in identity and beliefs. We are separated by circumstance, but we are united in love. However nature calls to you on this blue boat called Earth, you are welcome here. Let us take this time to explore the many mysteries of our life here. My name is Kathy Bradshaw, and my pronouns for today are she and hers. I am a member of the worship ministry team. We lead worship services when our ministers, the Reverend Suzelle Lynch and Denise Colley, are not in the pulpit. If you are new to this space and checking us out, we especially welcome you. It takes great courage to explore a new spiritual community, even virtually. We invite you to reach out just a little bit further and send a message to visitor@uucw.org. We would love to be in touch with you. I would like to introduce you to the wonderful people who have created today's service. Jennifer Nicolosi, who you just heard, our lead musical director, Dave and Pat Ryerson, who will light our chalice this morning, Dave Cicero, our director of Lifespan Religious Education, Carrie Bellistrari with our Split the Plate team, and Kelly Bognar with our publications and worship technology coordinator. She has some mad skills to make it all work. And today's special pulpit guest is Freesia McKee. Freesia is a poet, essayist, and hybridist who writes about apathy, empathy, power, and movement. Freesia grew up attending UUCW and graduated from high school in 2008. In 2017, Freesia moved to Miami, Florida, to pursue a master's degree in creative writing. She has written typewriter poems for the public, served as the poet in decadence at a local bar, facilitated a writing workshop at a museum exhibit of queer history, and has published, performed, and taught around the country. Freesia currently lives an hour from the Mississippi River in Western Illinois, where she teaches poetry and micro-memoir classes online and grows a vegetable garden. Thank you, Freesia, for being here today.
The great green earth surrounds us with sparrow songs, starlight, rain-splashed sunshine, and cooling shade, and the warm company of our human companions. Nature holds us tenderly, and because we remember that everything we have and everything we are comes from our earth, we light this chalice with gratitude for all that nature gives to us.
Good morning. I'm Dave Cicero, Director of Lifespan Religious Education here at UU Church West, and I tend to prefer he, his, or they pronouns. I'm intrigued by the nature of our pulpit guests' focus for worship today, ecology and the poetic turn. Learning that Freesia McKee is a writer, it made perfect sense to me for her to see a writing form as a way to help us gain deeper insight into our spiritual lives. I, like you, I hope, look forward to understanding this better after about an hour or so. But for now, I'm relating this to something I know a little bit more about. I'm a visual artist, and I know that the design of a piece helps communicate its message. Even when I'm in the middle of making it, I have no idea what the message is going to be. But trusting the creative process and surrendering to what naturally flows makes it easy to forget about the external physical world and get lost in my own inner space, which can then lead to some brilliant aha moments. I sometimes equate this with meditation, which I practice once in a while, but which has yet to gift me with those crystal clear realizations. But making or listening to music is another way that I can get into a flow state, where I can lose track of time, or even of others who are around me. What puts you into that frame of spirit? Now, it's fairly easy to understand how the style of a piece of music, or visual art, or poetry affects how the listener perceives and understands it. Take, for example, the hymn, Blue Boat Home. It's such a smooth, swaying tune, a waltz, I believe, in 3/4 time. It carries us forward, helping us to imagine, helping us feel that continual motion that our planet, our blue boat, carries us with. Metaphors like that are a key part of writing, too. Now, I discovered a book recently that was described as a love poem from a parent to their 2 sons. Now, I've heard a few love poems in my life. Sometimes they're sweet and romantic, right? How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. Sometimes they can be kind of nostalgic or sad. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. Well, this love poem or book is called The Thing About Bees, a Love Letter by Shabazz Larkin. A love poem about bees? Let's see. Well, it starts out here. Here's the thing about bees. Sometimes bees can be a bit rude. They fly in your face and prance on your food. They buzz in the bushes and buzz in your ear. They sneak up behind you and fill you with fear. And worst of all, they do this thing called sting. Ouch. Now, I'm not sure where the love part is coming in here, but it does go on to describe how we might want the bees gone. But then what would happen? Oh, right. Without bees, there'd be no flowers, no melons, no fruit pies, no pickles. Then there's a bit of a switch here, a poetic turn, if I understand that correctly. It says, in a way, the bees are just like you. You buzz in the bushes and buzz in my ear. You sneak up behind me and fill me with fear. You fly in my face and prance on my food. You even sting when you're in a bad mood. but I never stop loving you. The narrator then goes on to describe his loved ones with some cliches. My sweet cherry pie, apple of my eye. But then he uses some more original pet names too. My cucumber pickle, my bumblebee in the sky. And then they finally end with this. That's the thing about bees. We need them as much as we need you. Well, it turns out the author says here in the end notes that they wrote the book because they have this ridiculous fear of bees and didn't want to pass that on to their sons. So they write, I set out to discover all I could about the little buzzers. What's something that you fear? And what might happen if you were to set out and learn all you could about that thing? Now, the back cover of the book has this. Love will conquer fear. So true in so many ways. Well, this month at UU Church West, we are celebrating and shaping worth around nature. And those of you receiving weekly Summer Religious Education for All updates will soon get from me an invitation to write haiku. Haiku is a 3-line poem form. It's often rooted in nature. So hopefully you can get out in it for a while this week, quietly observing it, and then choosing a subject that inspires you. Compose 2 short lines describing what you're observing. It's best to use verbs in their present tense or with an ing at the end. Kind of flows better. And it creates a mental image for the listener. Now, the number of syllables doesn't really matter. That 5, 7, 5 thing doesn't really translate well from haiku's Japanese language roots. More important is that the third and final line shifts its perspective or mood, or reveals a surprise or a new interpretation of the previous lines. Want to hear my honeybee haiku? Well, you'll need to look for this week's Summer Ari for All email message. It should be in your inbox by morning. And if you're not getting those but would like to, let me know at davec@uucw.org. I'll be happy to include you. Enjoy the poetry and the readings today, and have a wonderful week.
I'm so glad to be with you here today and talk about poetry and ecology. For the last decade or so, I have considered myself a poet, by which I mean I spend as much time as I can thinking about and practicing writing. In recent years, poetry has been the main concern around which I form my life and made decisions, because I'm interested in poetry as an art form, a method of critical thinking, and notably also as a way of waking up and learning to pay attention. Any meditation, by which I mean focusing on one thing for an extended period, whether it is breath, a mantra, or a poetic image, helps us hone our capacity for gratitude. Observational capaciousness is part of why I'm drawn to poetry. But for many people, including some of the students I've taught over the last few years, poetry has a bit of a stodgier reputation. It's indecipherable. It was your worst subject in high school, boring and monotonous. And perhaps even worse, some people have the belief that poetry is something only those with a special stroke of inspiration can write. But I don't believe that only the chosen few are predestined to write poetry. I don't believe that only a few people are born poets. Instead, I am a poetic universalist, with the belief that there is room in poetry for anybody who's interested. And importantly, I also believe that there are many ways into poetry, and that what enters the doorways of our senses can be expressed through language and communication and rhetoric and meaning, and that the associative leaps, juxtapositions, and sharp turns of poetry can be expressed through a variety of means, not just on the page. The poet Camille Dungy writes, "Silence is one part of speech. Just as in a piece of music, the rests and pauses are just as important as the melody's notes. Those of us who've practiced silent meditation know that silence and slowing down gives meaning to the most cacophonous parts of our lives. And poetry plays with the power of magnitude. So a few lines can encompass an entire social movement, and contrarily, a poem could spend multiple pages zeroing in on a single termite, cockroach, cloud, or tree of heaven." The last year or so, I've been drawn to what some call ecopoetry and eco-justice poetry, what I define as poetry that directly engages with its dependence on place and ecology. Jonathan Choctaw writes, "What is eco-poetry? An eco-poem needs to be environmental, and it needs to be environmentalist." Wisconsin poet Kimberly Blazer writes, "What distinguishes eco-poetry from nature poetry is the embedded understanding of responsibility." And Laura Gray Street writes, "Eco-poetry isn't just any poetry garnished with birds and trees. It is a kind of paradigm shift." But doesn't all poetry happen somewhere, someplace? Are we saying that some poems are not eco-poems, not in interdependent relationship with their surroundings? Do eco-poems have to be political? And what happens if they verge on manifesto, didactic commentary, rant, or screed? Or is there a continuum of poetic politicization? And if an internal epiphany happens in a poem, as it often does, how does that personal realization translate into community change? I happen to believe that because poetry can be learned and taught, vocabulary words like eco-poetry tend to be useful when describing what we are doing. And just as painters use color, texture, hue, and contrast to evoke emotion, writers also have tools we can wield to work toward a particular emotional effect. One of these tools I want to talk about is something called the volta, the poetic turn. And one way to think about the volta is as a kind of poetic epiphany. A volta occurs when the poem turns the corner and reveals its true meaning, when the poem cuts deeper. If you're a reader of poetry, I'm sure you've felt this when reading a poem. For instance, listen to this classical haiku by Chione, a 17th century Buddhist nun, translated by Patricia Donegan and Yoshi Ishikashi. Listen to where this poem turns the corner. Where do you hear the volta? Green leaves or fallen leaves become one in the flowering snow. Here's another haiku from 20th century American novelist Richard Wright, author of the novel Native Son, who composed more than 800 haiku in the last years of his life. Listen again for the volta, the place where the poem turns the corner. Is this tiny pond the great big lake in which I swam as a boy? And here's a final short poem by Chinese poet Li Bai, composed more than 1,300 years ago and translated by Sam Hamill. Again, listen for the volta, the critical turn. Zazen on Qing Ting Mountain. The birds have vanished down the sky. Now the last cloud drains away. We sit together, the mountains and me, until only the mountains remain. Voltas happen in poems because sharp turns in any art form foster insight for creator and experiencer alike. I think we craft poems this way because voltas also happen in the world around us, like an April snowstorm, a rainbow, hitting an animal with your car on an otherwise ordinary evening, a fight or rivalry bubbling up between family members during a child's birthday party, predators and prey, unexpected welcomings, microaggressions in what is supposed to be safer space, unlikely friendships between misfit neighbors over literal fences, volunteer tomato plants sprouting from busted concrete. When what lies beneath emerges, we can view this sharp turn of affairs as a volta, and any volta related to place, to ecology in its broadest sense, is grist for writing eco-poetry. For 8 months during the pandemic, I lived with my partner in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a place where I often felt isolated and alone. Because I was not only social distancing, but also underemployed, I took long walks with our dog for up to 2 hours a day. In nearly every walk, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, and the white-hot rhetoric of hatred pierced me when I passed certain messaging in our neighborhood. I felt off-kilter, like I'd turned the corner into a parade of neighbors who appeared to hate everyone I loved. But I'd often turn the corner again and run into other voltas. Flocks of sandhill cranes migrating from one place to another. A surging squirrel population climbing up and down tall oaks like their lives depended on it, because they did. A snapping turtle the size of a human hand I tried to coax back toward the river with a stick. Intact birds' nests, sidewalk fallen, discarded, we'd run across that I carried home for a collection on top of my bookshelf. The ecology I'd been ignoring, distracted in my own head, in my own pain, broke through and reintroduced itself to me again and again. These sharp voltas between alienation and belonging reminded me of my responsibility to continue thriving in a place where it often felt like the human inhabitants wished we would leave. At the very beginning of the pandemic, when we still lived in South Florida, I took up a practice of writing a letter each day to a 20-foot tall palm tree behind our apartment. 30 letters, and of course the palm tree never responded, but the letters became poems. I found the practice of writing to a sessile being, something that never moves to higher ground, a tree, deeply anchoring, because I was experiencing so much personal disruption, translating what I saw on the news to how it might affect my friends and family, and seeing the city of Miami shut down for COVID tighter than even in the wake of an approaching hurricane. I'll read some of these poems I wrote to the palm tree later today. But first, I want to point out that one of the things we do when we connect interior and exterior is to create a metaphor. Metaphors, another favorite tool of poets, typically illustrate what is unseeable. I wonder if every artist, every creator, all of you, are on a continual journey to connect interior experience to what's on the outside. I'd like to end this first section of my sharing today by reading an eco poem about language by a contemporary poet named W.S. Merwin, who lived for decades in Hawaii, where he tended to a small forest of rare palm trees. What the Bridges Hear by W.S. Merwin. Even the right words, if ever we come to them, tell of something the words never knew. Celestia for starlight, or starlight for starlight. So at this moment, there may be words somewhere among the nebula, for the two bridges cross the wide rock-strewn river, partway around the bend from each other, in the winter sunlight, late in the afternoon, more than half a century ago, with the sound of the water rushing under them and passing between them, unvarying and inaudible. It is still there. So is the late sunlight of that winter afternoon, though the winter has vanished, and the bridges are still reaching across the wide sound of being there. So I'm going to read some poems from my palm tree project, which I ended up titling Water Study. Dear cellulose, tubular trunk, today I've been trying to slow down. I haven't gone anywhere. Sitting, the muscle memory of it, the TV show of the lake, motivational directions on the screen. It's all about how you look at it. It's all about the feeling. Photographing plates of food because I can share only the photo, letting the pain drain out of my head as I lay on the floor. On my back, I cried because I felt a pain behind my back, not in the physical muscle, but the emotional one, not the bone or the space between the bones, but cognition, frenetic, ghostly, that residual aristocrat of vulnerability. She's been alone since she was born. Whether or not she knows it, she spends her life in the act of creating, and she can see a little bit past what she's made, and more with time, an inch, a leaf, a branch, the variable length of one day. Yesterday on the water, we were floating for 2 hours. When we stopped paddling, we saw the moon. We all stopped paddling at once. A sphere is not a sphere. Overhead, legs of a green heron in flight. Dear bark, cork, plank. It hailed in North Miami today and got me wondering, was this the first time you, palm tree, encountered ice? How can something frozen exist in the wilds of South Florida naturally? No matter where you are on Earth, if you go up high, it's cold. Hail from the heavens. When it started, I was on the phone with my friend Lacey to discuss her upcoming wedding. Still on the line, I opened the sliding door and plucked dime-sized ice from the wooden walkway to save in our freezer. For what? Proof of hail? As the crevices of South Florida's palm trees filled with frozen coins, Jade grabbed the quilt off our bed and ran outside to lay it on the car roof. Little dents. It's been storming all week, and Jade is afraid of the house being hit by lightning. And I tried to comfort her by saying that being hit by lightning is as likely as being hit by lightning. Though since we had that conversation, I've been noticing story after story about people surviving or perishing after being hit by lightning. What are the chances of any of it? The hailstones are in our freezer now. Jade collected some too, and I laughed at our common nostalgia, a kind of frozen archive, 3D file for various dangers. Later, we were walking through the parking lot where I go running, and Jade found a quartz crystal, one edge jagged, run over by a car, washed it when we got home, filed it under clear things that do not melt. Refraction compels permission. The dog licks the water bowl clean, evidence of the day. So some of my letters to the palm tree became micro essays, less than 1 page long. So I'm going to read one of these for you and then another poem. My partner Jade has a keen ability to spot strewn coins or a lost earring on the ground. She notices wild animals hidden in the brush when I walk right by them. Jade is a natural bird watcher. To get really good at anything requires a certain ability to perceive, see, to know what to look for. Two people watch the same video clip, walk the same wood chip path, and in any situation, someone misses what's at play. To see is also about listening. My uncle taught his daughters how to weld. My father taught my sister and I how to graft apple trees, how to make applesauce and cider, how to build a ball of snow, how, when you see a white-tailed hawk, to point up and say, "Look." I have spent several years attempting to learn how to see a text's possibilities, to part the words and step into the larger conversations they bounce off of, to assess a text's words at face value, recognize intent and context and the actual dance of these elements. Jade drives us to a park where a wooden platformed path snakes through trees. Jade spots a penny, a cardinal, a huge orange iguana, a hawk, a large metal nut, a mud-soaked friendship bracelet. We walk the whole loop, encountering only one person who stares intently into the forest away from us. What is the difference between a practice and a study? This will be the last poem in this section. My dad recycled pages from the journal Sentinel to make a mat on our kitchen table for the new crop of Jerusalem artichokes he pulled up from the garden. We removed the papers after washing the chokes, adding their edible bulbs to kitchen bowls holding beefsteak, heirloom, Adirondack blue, and apples. Adults had already explained that I should know the difference between soil and dirt. Dirt was what I shouldn't track around in my cleats at home. Soil was the clay and pack and rust coating our harvest from the ground. Soil became dirt after we washed it from food. Kitchen sink filmed with a dirty sheen I could write my name in. Just about any dirt could become soil through compost. It was a righteous transformation. Far above the garden, purple martins snatched flies and gnats, darting back into their homes. We moved between the garden and the kitchen, rearranging our conduction.
UU Church West's Split the Plate program is one of outreach and generosity. Each month, we give half of all undesignated offerings to a nonprofit organization to help us live our Unitarian Universalist values and to serve our community. Our Split the Plate partner for June through mid-July is Groundwork Milwaukee. Groundwork is focused on bringing people into contact with the natural world in projects that benefit both people and the environment. For example, Groundwork engages at-risk youth in the transformation of brownfields into community spaces such as gardens and orchards. Groundwork also focuses on protection of our urban waters with projects such as installing rainwater harvesting structures and restoring habitat for aquatic native species. For example, Groundwork played a major role in the redevelopment of the Kinnickinnick watershed, which had been named one of the top 10 most endangered rivers in the country. All this while providing environmental education and job training for disadvantaged youth. Be sure to check the article on Groundwork in the weekly e-news for more information on all the great work that is being done by this organization. To support Groundwork Milwaukee anytime this month, go to the UUCW website's Donate tab, select Split the Plate from the menu, or you can text or email your donation today using the information found here. Today, I thank you for your generosity to Groundwork Milwaukee.
When a poem or any piece of art makes us feel something, it may be that the art is reflecting the voltas, the sharp turns of our lives. And in a world where loneliness seems to be a prime element of our condition, seeing our reflections can be comforting. When the ordinary and transcendent connect, which we often see happen when we focus on nature and ecology, the world becomes poignant, beautiful. And we become aware of our own connections, a source of nourishment and comfort. So I encourage you to identify the voltas, the sharp turns you experience through the rest of the day, or if you like to read and write, maybe even observe or create on the page. And now we'll sing hymn 1064, Blue Boat Home, and the words will be on the screen.
Thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on. Great the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my boat home.
Thank you, Freesia, for all your wonderful words and insight. Our parting words today are from Mary Edis. Like the cosmic dust after the great Perseid meteor, we are the living remnants of time and all that has come to pass in its wake. Briefly shining lights on the way to eternity. We are only visible to the naked eye for an instant. Take this moment to shine like the stardust you are. May the light of our time on earth shine to bless the world and each other. Blessed be. Amen and Ashe. Thank you. Thank you.